Not long after the progress bar on Noah's mission panel ticked forward, Tony returned to the base carrying an unconscious Alexander Pierce. He'd shut off the suit's color-shifting module for the trip. The armor came down in classic red and gold, and Tony finished with a dead-on Iron Man landing, metallic joints whining as he touched down. Fury and a ring of S-Shield agents met him and took Pierce from Tony's shoulder. When Fury first learned Pierce was a Hydra operative, his reaction had been fury and betrayal. A man he'd trusted had been using him all along. By the time Pierce arrived at the base, Fury had cooled. What mattered now was information. Pierce's rank and knowledge were tools S-Shield needed to root out Hydra. "Take him to the interrogation room," Fury said, hands clasped behind his back as the agents guided Pierce off the armor. "Do not wake him." Tony shrugged. "Operation went fine. Cap and Romanoff are on their way back." He sounded casual, but the memory of the mission still impressed him. This was his first real kidnap and exfiltration. "Pierce did wake up once on the flight back, but I put him out again." Fury's eyes narrowed. Tony explained quickly. Black Widow had stunned Pierce with a dart in his council office. Tony had flown them back at less than top speed because a regular human couldn't survive the G-forces of supersonic flight in ordinary clothes. Still, at high altitude, the cold snapped Pierce awake. He bolted and started struggling. Tony couldn't use a taser. His suit didn't have that option. So with Jarvis guiding him to the right spot and moderating the force, he palm-struck the back of Pierce's neck and knocked him out cleanly. Tony added, half smiling, that he'd seen scenes like that in Chinese movies. Without Jarvis's help, he might have done worse. Fury rubbed his own neck at the memory and said, "All right, we wait for Captain and the others. Then it'll be up to Noah and his abilities." Tony blinked. "What abilities? What's Noah going to do with Pierce?" "You'll see soon," Fury said, glancing toward a secure room on the far side of the floor where a few Hydra members were being held. There was something about Noah's presence that made Fury cautious. Tony didn't have time to pry. The suit needed to be taken off and stored. It wasn't a portable Mark V that folded into a briefcase, so he headed to the armory and then toward the interrogation wing. The interrogation room was spare. Concrete walls, a single hanging light, an iron chair bolted to the floor. Noah sat in the corner, lean and composed, arms and legs crossed as he watched the scene like someone watching bad theater. Pierce sat cuffed in the chair, wrists and ankles bound, head drooped. He hadn't fully come around. In front of him stood Fury. Behind Fury were Coulson and Hawkeye, their faces a tangle of disbelief and anger. This man had been their superior. That he was Hydra felt unreal. Tony opened the door and stepped in. "Everyone here?" he asked. "No," Noah said. "Two are still missing." "They'll be here," Tony said, then moved closer to Noah. "Hey, tell me about that Zola you saw. What was he like after he uploaded himself into a computer?" Noah smirked. "You planning to turn yourself into an AI, Stark?" Tony waved him off. "No, come on. I'm curious. Even if I ever thought about that, it would be when I was old and desperate to keep living. I'm not ready to stop being human." They didn't finish the conversation. Staff led Captain Rogers and Natasha Romanoff in through the adjoining door, Sitwell in custody behind them. Rogers nodded at Fury. "Hydra's Sitwell is secure," he said, and agents took Sitwell to another interrogation room. Fury narrowed his eyes and looked down at Pierce. "Good. Time to wake him up." Chapter 302, Nick Fury's Question Crash. A bucket of ice water hit Pierce in the face. He convulsed as the cold stole the last of his consciousness. His eyes snapped open, pupils constricting. He woke in an instant. His neatly combed blonde hair hung damp against his forehead and ears, droplets sliding down his cheeks. For a moment he looked around with raw fear and confusion, then recognition hit. Across from him stood Nick Fury, clad in a black trench coat, calm and unreadable. "Nick Fury," Pierce said. "Alexander Pierce," Fury replied. Fury regarded his former friend with a hard, steady gaze, as if he could see straight through to the man beneath the suit. The dim interrogation room only emphasized how composed and imposing he looked. "I never imagined you'd deceive me for so long, for years, keeping the whole of S-Shield in the dark." Pierce inhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. He still didn't understand why Iron Man and Captain America had stormed into his office and dragged him here. Could his identity really have been exposed? It was hard to believe. He was now a minister on the World Security Council. He hadn't expected to be uncovered so easily. But there was no time for speculation. First, he had to manage the immediate situation. Fury, what exactly is going on? Don't you realize how serious it is to detain a World Security Council minister? Pierce said, forcing calm. Fury's face remained icy. He sank into a quiet, measured tone. So tell me, why did you choose me to be director of S.H.I.E.L.D.? I want the reason. Pierce blinked. Back when S.H.I.E.L.D. had been heavily infiltrated by Hydra, he'd stepped down as director to pursue a higher, safer post, letting Hydra consolidate influence in his wake. Fury had been someone Pierce trusted and respected, brilliant, efficient, ruthless when needed, so Pierce had pushed him into the top job. Pierce believed Fury could stabilize S.H.I.E.L.D., help it grow, and that a stronger S.H.I.E.L.D. would also strengthen the Hydra elements embedded within it. From Pierce's perspective, the plan reduced his own exposure while using Fury's position to further Hydra's reach. Two advantages with one move. But whatever calculations Pierce had made hadn't gone exactly as he expected. Seeing Fury's cold expression, the realization that he had been found out finally sank in. Because you're the most capable and ruthless man I've ever met, Pierce said flatly. Fury closed his eyes, drew a breath, and looked past Pierce. Noah, he's yours, he said, stepping aside. Noah sprang to his feet and walked to stand in front of Pierce. Everyone in the room, agents, Rogers, Hawkeye, turned to look. Fury had every intention of watching. He'd never personally seen how Noah exerted this control and wanted to study the method so he could guard against it in the future. Noah had already taken the Mind Stone from the lab and kept it on his person. After using it a few times, he discovered he didn't need to hold the stone directly to wield its power. He raised his palm to his chest, facing upward. Under Pierce's terrified stare and the curious eyes of the others, a yellow light coalesced in Noah's hand, glowing against the interrogation room's gloom. Don't worry, you won't feel a thing, Noah said, smiling coldly. The yellow energy surged, splitting into 3 thin beams that flowed into Pierce's eye sockets and his mouth. For an instant, it looked as if 3 translucent serpents had slithered into him. The sight made several people shiver. Noah withdrew his hand. The Mind Stone's influence had entered Pierce, taking hold of his body and mind, though externally there was no immediate, dramatic change. Those with sharp observation, Hawkeye and Rogers, noticed a subtle shift. Pierce's pupils, once light blue, had darkened to a deep, almost inky blue. It was a small detail, easily missed unless you were watching closely. None of them knew the full meaning behind it. Noah tapped the handcuffs at Pierce's wrists twice. They clicked open. He then released whatever device held Pierce's ankles. The agents in the room tensed and moved to block any sudden action. Stay calm, Noah said, waving a hand. Then, in a voice as cold as a trainer's, he issued a command to Pierce. Pierce stood. He moved like a man waking from a dream, mechanical, expressionless, a puppet under someone else's hand. Noah turned back to the room. From now on, whatever you ask him, he'll answer. Silence filled the interrogation room. Everyone stared, shocked at what they'd just witnessed, and at the realization of how thoroughly Noah had broken Pierce's will. Chapter 303, Powerful Mind Gem. Alexander Pierce, Hydra leader and member of the World Security Council, stood motionless like a puppet before them. Tony and the others gathered around, watching. They had seen a flash of yellow energy in Noah's hand flow into Pierce's body. What happened after that was a blur. Pierce simply froze in this vacant, controlled state. Tony circled him, stroking his chin, even prodding Pierce's arm. No response. What happened to him? He asked, returning to Noah after a few slow laps. Hypnosis? Mind control? What is that yellow energy, Noah? The others exchanged uneasy looks. The idea that Noah could so effortlessly seize control of someone as powerful and connected as Pierce made them wary. If he could do that to Pierce, could he do it to any of them? Noah met their gazes without much reaction. It's mind control, he said. Do you remember the Mind Stone I mentioned at your banquet? Mind Stone? The words brought back the stories Noah had told at Tony's table about the Infinity Stones. Most of them, except Fury, who hadn't attended, recalled being briefed by Coulson later. Fury had been skeptical at first. The whole thing sounded almost fantastical. But then he thought of the Tesseract and the inexplicable power it displayed, and the idea that such objects could exist stopped sounding so outlandish. When Coulson had gone over each stone's supposed abilities, Fury had been stunned. If humanity could harness that kind of power, threats from beyond Earth would be less frightening. But the thought of someone on Earth wielding the Mind Stone made Fury uneasy. If it ever fell into the wrong hands, the danger would be incalculable. Still, from what Fury had observed of Noah, he didn't think Noah intended to harm the planet. He decided to keep a close, careful watch, his default stance for any uncertain variable. Noah had already offered a hint earlier that morning. When he brought back the 9-headed serpent agent under his control, Fury suspected Noah was using the Mind Stone. So when Noah suggested bringing Alexander Pierce back and then handed Pierce over, Fury agreed without hesitation. The possibilities flooded his mind. Extract Hydra intelligence, use Pierce's identity to unmask deeper conspiracies, plan an operation. Fury's strategic wheels were turning fast. "Noah, Pierce is yours now," Noah said, placing a hand on Pierce and transferring the control, just as he had with the serpent agent. Fury nodded, then moved without delay, taking Pierce to an interrogation room to squeeze out whatever information he could. Coulson and the team followed. Steve Rogers glanced once at the faint yellow glow still on Noah's hand and then left. "That's a terrifying ability," Tony said, eyes still fixed on Noah. "Does it have limits? Could you control anyone you want?" "No," Noah replied, "not completely without limits. If the target is significantly stronger than me, I might not be able to take them. But on Earth right now, there aren't many who reach that level." He thought for a moment, considering who might resist the Mind Stone's reach. The Sorcerer Supreme, Gu Yi, would be one. Some of the Eternals might have enough innate resistance, given their origins with the Celestials, and there's a chance Wenwu, the real leader behind the Ten Rings, could resist. The Mandarin in Iron Man 3 was just an actor hired by Killian. The true Wenwu controls the Ten Rings artifact, which grants great power and even extended life. Someone wielding that might stand up to the stone. Noah added a caveat. That's resistance to direct control. If I were fighting them and seriously wounded them, their ability to resist would drop. Tony's smile was equal parts awe and greed. What a marvelous treasure. Chapter 304, Tony's surprise. What incredible power. "I'd love to see the other Infinity Stones you mentioned," Tony said. For him, the stones upended everything he understood. A genius inventor and scientist, Tony had always used logic and empirical methods to explain the world. The Infinity Stone's power went beyond the conventional and scientific and left him alternately stunned and unsettled. "If there's a chance, I'll let you see the others," Noah said with a smile. "I'll collect the remaining stones later, too." Noah understood Tony's reaction. If he hadn't already seen the movies and known about the stones, Noah might have been just as shocked. The stone's power truly exceeded normal human comprehension. "Collect? You mean there are other stones on Earth?" Tony blinked, surprised at the word. Noah shook his head. "No, the stones are scattered across the universe. I'll have to travel into space to search for them." "What?" Tony's surprise deepened. He hadn't expected Noah to be thinking about leaving Earth, venturing into the vast unknown. That's bold. He touched his mouth, thinking back to his childhood dreams of exploring the cosmos. Growing up and learning how difficult it would be had tempered that dream, yet Noah seemed to have means. "Have you built a spaceship? Do you have propulsion tech that can cross galaxies?" Tony pressed. For human interstellar travel, propulsion was everything. Without it, you were stuck in the solar system. "As for a spaceship, I do have one," Noah said with a hint of pride. Tony's eyes widened. "You have a spaceship?" It was staggering. Noah was a genius. He'd already built powerful suits at 16, and he knew magic. But a spaceship was on another level. Noah smiled at Tony's astonished face and started toward the door. He intended to leave the Hydra matter to Nick Fury and his people, partly to see whether others could handle a task when he didn't intervene. If he stepped in, it would still count as his participation. "Wait, when can I see this spaceship? Maybe I can give you some suggestions." Tony hurried alongside him, eager and curious. "In a little while. After I deal with these Hydra nuisances, I'll prepare for my plans in space. As for suggestions, I don't think they'll be necessary. Hey, Are you looking down on me, Noah? I admit you're a genius, maybe even more so than me, but I'm older and I've got some ideas. I could surprise you with something innovative, Tony muttered. Noah waved his hand with mock resignation. Okay. Meanwhile, after detaining Alexander Pierce, Nick Fury wasted no time. Using Pierce in his current puppet state, Fury interrogated him to extract everything about Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. Gradually, Fury learned how Pierce and Hydra had insinuated themselves into the organization, discovered member lists, and uncovered plans. The revelations were chilling, especially the details of the so-called Insight Project. If Hydra had truly succeeded, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Still, Fury thought of Noah. If Hydra's plan had worked, S.H.I.E.L.D. would have been devastated, but Noah's involvement made the full scope of disaster less clear. The interrogation yielded information that overlapped with Dr. Zola's records, but also filled in gaps Zola hadn't documented. Agent Coulson, standing beside Fury, recorded everything and felt his faith in the organization shaken. Yet as a seasoned agent, he braced himself and kept working. Fury didn't interrogate Pierce longer than necessary. Pierce still had a vital role to play. Fury knew that letting Pierce appear normal and remain the public face of the World Security Council would prevent other Hydra agents from detecting any disturbance. Surprising the Snake would only make things harder. After the questioning, Fury cleaned Pierce up and dressed him to resume his duties. Fury then consulted Noah about the plan. After thinking it over, Noah offered an unexpected solution. He could allow Pierce to retain his own consciousness while ensuring his loyalty, similar to how Loki controlled people in the past. Fury's surprise turned to wary admiration. Noah's power was even more versatile than Fury had suspected. Noah adjusted his control so Pierce would be himself, but obedient to Noah. He also set up a toggle. If Fury ever needed Pierce to revert to the puppet state, Fury would only have to say a command. Noah told him the phrase and widened his single eye. "Hail, Hydra." Noah found the idea of Fury speaking that line to Pierce amusing and burst out laughing on the spot, ignoring Fury's even darker expression. "Warwick, that's the place up ahead. Don't let any ordinary people stumble onto your tracks." On the outskirts of Hell's Kitchen, the night hung like a heavy curtain, swallowing buildings in thick shadow. The old streetlights had long since lost their glow, flickering fitfully and casting a thin, sickly light. Distant gunshots echoed from the heart of the neighborhood, sharpening the silence with an uneasy tension. Perched on a rooftop, Project Warwick, a mechanical warrior Noah had painstakingly built, watched the streets below. At Noah's command, his shell, once bright blue and white, shifted slowly into a low-profile black and red, blending into the darkness. He crouched like a predator, every sensor locked on the scene beneath him. In the muted moonlight, his red optics glowed. The transformation made him look more feral, more ghost than machine. Even if he had stayed blue and white, no ordinary resident here would notice. Hell's Kitchen was a place people avoided. If they could afford to leave, they would have. Every night, the poor shut themselves behind bolted doors, pretending not to hear footsteps or fireworks, afraid that looking out would invite trouble. It was long past midnight. With the clock flipping into a new day, Noah's task count had refreshed, and he'd decided to send Warwick back to this old monster grinding spot. The day before, he'd used some task count to accept an A-level assignment involving Hydra. Now he wanted to test whether the task panel would still refresh if he sent his subordinate into the dangerous zone. "All right, Warwick, move in. Find the punks and the gangsters. Those are our targets tonight." Warwick rose silently, eyes fixed on the dark below. He sprang, tensing his hydraulic limbs and landing on the roof of another building 10 meters away. His four limbs moved in a smooth, precise rhythm, claws barely touching the surface. He was swift and efficient, a machine bred for the hunt. The metal of his frame flashed coldly against the night, a perfect synthesis of engineering and animal instinct. Below, gunfire and loud music threaded the darkness. Warwick locked onto the source, an outdoor rave in the street plaza. A cluster of people in loud, flashy clothes, all sporting mohawk haircuts, danced and thrashed around speakers, bobbing and jerking as if the music would tear their heads off. Empty pill blisters, scattered white powders, and glass pipes glittered among them. The paraphernalia screamed of meth use. colorful pills, lines of powder, broken glassware for smoking. Noah recognized the signs from anti-drug campaigns in his previous life. In some countries, the attitude toward these substances differed, but here the scene left him queasy. Warwick's sensors picked up more than the music. Random gunshots fired into the sky, people stumbling, eyes glassy. He flexed his claws and scraped the concrete, a hairline fracture appearing where metal met masonry. Prey, his internal display logged. Wait, Warwick, don't engage. Scan their IDs first. Noah had to be certain of the targets before acting. Warwick folded back into a low crouch and began a full biometric and identity sweep, streaming data back to Noah in real time. Noah lay on his couch at home, a holographic screen rising before him to display Warwick's feed. He watched the images, the Mohawk dancers, the drugs, the guns, and flicked through the scanned profiles. The gang was a known local crew, the Mohawk Gang. Their rule was obvious from the look on their heads. Everyone wore a mohawk, a stupid little uniform that made them easy to spot. They'd staked out this corner and turned it into a chaotic party zone. Every Hell's Kitchen gang, by Noah's standards, deserved punishment. But right now the priority was tactical. Would sending Warwick trigger a task? Noah brought up the system panel and hit refresh. A new mission popped into the list. Sea-level task. Eliminate the Mohawk Gang in Hell's Kitchen. Warwick, you can act now. Warwick, you can start. Leave no one alive. Noah issued the order after reviewing the intel on the group. The gang numbered roughly 30-some members, and the patch of ground below Warwick was right in the middle of Mohawk Gang territory. There were men and women among them, but to Warwick they were nothing more than noisy prey. Noisy things. I'm going to tear them apart, and their speakers, Warwick snarled, spreading his razor claws. A cold glint flashed across the tips as he dropped. The steel beast hit the ground with a thunderous crash, raising a cloud of dust. A table of white powder overturned. The powder mixed with the dust and hung in the air like a bizarre fog. Hey, what the hell? Fuck, my stuff. Who the hell did this? You in there. Get out. The tremor drew attention. The gang members were dazed from whatever they'd taken, but seeing their stash ruined snapped many into anger. Someone spied a shadow in the dust and started cursing. Others realized there was an intruder and began to shout. Kill him. I really need to pee. Cut off this guy's head. I'll use it to piss. Ha, brother, heavy tastes. They were drunk or high and fuzzy-headed, arguing about how to handle the stranger. As the smoke cleared, a figure stepped out of the haze, an all-black and red steel werewolf over 2 meters tall, standing like an iron tower. Its eyes burned crimson, twin coals in the gloom. Sharp fangs and red claws glinted. Its presence radiated a chill. Project Doom Warwick, Prairie Fire. That was the name of the skin's chroma. The gang's chattering died instantly. Some backed away, trembling. What is that? A voice quavered. A few, still way too wired to be sensible, laughed it off. One of them, a man with a green mohawk, hauled up a UMP-9 and opened fire. Da-da-da-da-da, the submachine gun barked. Bullets flashed from the muzzle, but not the outcome the shooter expected. The costume, whatever it had been supposed to be, behaved like an indestructible plate. The rounds hit Warwick with ringing clangs, sparks flying as metal met metal. Bullet tips that would normally penetrate flesh buckled and flattened, clattering to the ground. The Mohawk man blinked, stunned, eyeing the scene as if he'd hallucinated it. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he'd taken too much. He squeezed the trigger again. Then Warwick was suddenly in front of him. A red light flashed. The UMP-9 in the shooter's hands split apart. The top and bottom slid away and clattered to the ground. He stood dumbfounded for a heartbeat, then pain ripped through him. His vision blurred, his legs gave out, and he realized he couldn't feel his lower body. He looked down, eyes widening at a horrifying sight. A lower half of a body was standing on the ground, bloody, severed, and it seemed to be his. Ah! He screamed. The pain cleared his fogged brain. He was bleeding everywhere. His organs spilled from his abdomen. Every head turned. The realization came like ice. This was no cosplay. The steel werewolf was real. The belatedly lucid gang members grabbed weapons and unleashed a torrent of bullets, but rounds still rang off Warwick with metallic clangs. Warwick didn't just shrug them off. He hunted. Carnage is the only word for it. Made of vibranium like metal, Warwick was impervious to the gang's small firearms. Every part of him was a weapon. His claws sliced through bodies like a knife through tofu. His maw, soaked in blood and bristling with steel teeth, ripped upper bodies from torsos, leaving lower halves writhing and bleeding on the pavement. He slammed a shoulder like a piston into another thug. The man was struck with the force of a freight train, lifted and flung through the air before collapsing in a broken heap. Warwick's glowing, rotten tail became a deadly tool, at times a steel whip that shattered bones, at others a bladed lash that bisected men at the waist. Noah, watching from home, raised an eyebrow at the brutal, over-the-top display. He felt like he was watching a movie. Warwick could have ended the conflict with lasers or area effect blasts, but the machine seemed to relish tearing his prey apart by hand. Each rip and crush lit up the feed with red panic. The ferocity on screen was almost intoxicating. Task completed. Gained 200 essence. Chapter 307, Processing Site. When the dust finally settled, the once boisterous gang hangout had become a nightmarish landscape. If this were a movie, the whole thing would need heavy censoring, Noah thought as he watched the feed. After Warwick finished off the Mohawked gang member, Noah's task panel refreshed instantly. The status flipped from in progress to completed. He tapped the complete task button without hesitation. A system prompt confirmed the reward, 200 essence. It was a modest payout for a C-level task, exactly what he expected. Noah felt pleased, not just for the essence, but for what the experience proved. He could delegate tasks to his subordinates, and they could actually finish them for him. From now on, his schedule would be much freer. He'd still handle dangerous A-level tasks and the tricky B-level ones himself, but routine C-level jobs? He could hand those to Warwick, Blitzcrank, and the other nanobots. Their firepower was more than enough for most threats on Earth. Finally, I can be free, he murmured, stretching as a weight seemed to lift from his chest. Tracking down low-level thugs and dealing with them every day had never been his idea of fun. Even if he'd enjoyed it in small doses, turning it into a 9-to-5 grind would have worn him down. He wasn't complaining about the essence, though. Essence meant draws, and B-level and higher jobs were far more interesting than endless monster grinding. It felt good to have a crew that didn't tire. Noah closed the task panel and looked at the live feed. "Warwick, come back. Clean up the scene before you leave," he said. On the screens, the Mohawk gang's Hell's Kitchen turf was a horror scene, crimson pooling on the pavement, scattered severed limbs. Any passerby seeing it would likely think they'd wandered into hell. Warwick stood amid the chaos, nose twitching, sweeping the area with an animal's precision. Although he was a robot wolf, his core design included genetic templates derived from the ancient hero Warwick, the uncaged wrath of Zon, from Project World. When Noah ordered Warwick's manufacture, the system had provided those genes. Project Warwick therefore inherited abilities like an extraordinarily keen sense of smell and the blood hunt, an obsession with scent and blood. Warwick had already used that tracking to flush gang members from hiding places, drag them out, and tear them apart. Now he was running a final scan for stragglers. At Noah's command, he exited combat mode and took in the scene, considering how best to comply. Then he flexed his claws. The power unit on his back began to hum and slowly charge. A faint blue glow bled across its surface as energy built, crackling with electrical tension. When it peaked, Warwick gave a low, controlled roar, and the device discharged. A concentrated electric current radiated from his frame and swept outward in a semicircular arc. Wherever the current passed, the high-energy wave vaporized debris on the ground. The blood, the severed limbs, everything was consumed by the blast. The blue arc faded as quickly as it had formed. Car alarms began to wail from nearby streets. When the light died down, all that remained was a scorched circle of pavement and rising steam like the aftermath of some localized inferno beneath the cold moonlight. "Nope, that was a little overkill," Noah muttered, rubbing his forehead as he watched the aftermath. He waved his hand and tapped into his spatial power. A pale blue teleportation portal opened in the Manor's underground lab, stitched through to the site. Warwick glanced at the portal and stepped straight through without hesitation. One moment, he disappeared from Hell's Kitchen. The next, he materialized in Noah's underground lab. Noah nodded as he appeared, glancing once more at the burned patch on the feed. Scenes like this weren't rare in Hell's Kitchen. Police were used to brutal gang clashes and would probably chalk it up to arson or an explosive fight. Even a careful investigation might turn up clues, but Noah wasn't worried about them tracing anything back to Warwick. In a neighborhood like this, drenched in crime and violence, the police simply didn't have the resources to follow every lead. All right, today's task is done. Noah closed the screen and leaned back, ready to rest. He had no intention of dealing with Hydra right now. He left that to Nick Fury and his team. There would be other matters to handle tomorrow. Chapter 308, Searching for Eternals. A new day. Noah opened his eyes slowly and felt the emptiness beside him, only a lingering warmth in the covers. He turned and saw Lyssandra's side of the bed was empty. She had already gotten up. Noah sprang out of bed and went straight to the window. He pulled the curtains aside, and warm sunlight poured into the room. He breathed in, letting the light wash over him. "Another beautiful day," he said, standing at the window and looking out over the courtyard. He was in a good mood. Yesterday's experiments with the system had taken another step forward, and he'd even found a few shortcuts to take it easy. Today, though, he had other business to handle before leaving Earth for the wider universe. There were a few problems he wanted settled on Earth first. Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. was one. He'd handed that to Nick Fury and his team and only needed to wait for the mission to finish. If Fury couldn't clean it up even after getting Hydra's data and neutralizing Pierce, then Noah figured Fury might as well retire. Beyond Hydra were two more pressing concerns: the Reality Stone and the Eternals. The Reality Stone would only reemerge during the Nine Realms alignment, and by Noah's calculations, that cosmic event was still some time off. He had already gone to Asgard and negotiated with Odin. Noah had offered to take custodianship of the Reality Stone in exchange for helping Asgard deal with their old enemy, the Dark Elves. Odin had agreed. Asgard never had much appetite for holding the Infinity Stones. They had possessed two at one time, but had sealed them away outside their realm, in part because Odin was old and Thor was still too inexperienced to risk the stone's influence. Since Asgard couldn't or wouldn't guard them, Noah had volunteered. Odin agreed, but they still needed to find where the Reality Stone had been sealed. That search was ongoing. The Eternals were Noah's target for today. A newborn Celestial was gestating in the Earth's core, still immature but already a looming threat. The Eternals had been created by the Celestials and were powerful. Each possessed distinct abilities. Circe, the female Eternal who could transmute matter at a molecular level, was especially important in any plan to deal with the celestial infant. Noah didn't expect to solve the problem in days. First, he needed to find the Eternals, talk to them, and, if possible, recruit them to oppose the Celestials. Most of the Eternals believed they were Earth's guardians, charged with eradicating deviance and protecting life. In truth, their deeper mission was to ensure the newborn Celestial had enough living material to feed on when it was born. If the Eternals discovered that, many whose loyalties had softened over centuries on Earth, those who had formed families and grown attached to humanity, would surely waver. Noah thought that, aside from Icarus and Ajak, many would turn against their makers. He wanted to give them a choice before the Celestial came of age. After breakfast, he took to the sky. At 1,000 meters, puffy cumulus clouds drifted like cotton balls. Noah cut through them, leaving a white trail in his wake, and soared high above New York. The city had just recovered from recent battles, and reconstruction was well underway. He released his magic to sweep the city, scanning for the two Eternals he'd seen earlier at the amusement park with Lysandra and Gwen. He'd been surprised then to find two Eternals living in New York, but he'd been enjoying a rare, carefree day and hadn't pursued them. Now he intended to make contact. One was Circe, the Eternal whose transmutation powers made her central to his plans. The other, he suspected, was the man who had once secretly admired Circe and later betrayed the group, likely Icarus. Noah activated Ghost Step and raced through the city at supersonic speed. Because of Ghost Step, his passage caused minimal disturbance even at that velocity, and his scans normally picked up any being with unusual energy signatures. But to his surprise, he could not find the two Eternals anywhere in New York. Puzzled, he switched to a conversational channel with Lysandra. "Lysandra, Do you remember those two I mentioned from the amusement park? Find their current locations." A moment later, she replied, "They left New York a few days ago. Both took a flight to London." "London," Noah muttered. That fit. He'd seen them in London in the movie footage, but he hadn't expected them to have left for the same place now. Since he couldn't locate them here, he decided to change plans and contact Ajak, the Eternal's leader. The Ancient One had already said she and Ajak had spoken, and Ajak was waiting for Noah to visit. He angled away from New York's skyline and set his course across the Atlantic toward the next step in bringing the Eternals into the fight. Chapter 309, Failed. Noah streaked across the South Dakota sky, parting cloud after cloud as he headed for the vast prairie below. South Dakota's sweeping grasslands stretched into the distance, a rolling sea of autumn gold. He flew high, scanning the landscape for a sign of Ajak. This morning, he had tried to track down the two Eternal he'd encountered in New York, only to find that they had already vanished, leaving America for London, the very city where they first appeared on film. Whether that was a quirk of converging timelines or simply a reaction to the battle in New York, Noah couldn't be sure. Since they were gone, he decided to seek out the leader of the Eternals, Ajak. He had introduced the Eternals and the Celestials to the Ancient One at Kamartaj, and the Ancient One had gone to speak with Ajak in person. Noah suspected the Ancient One's visit was meant to verify what he had said about the Celestials and to learn Ajak's stance. Afterward, the Ancient One had relayed that Ajak wanted to meet him, leaving Noah to follow that lead. Ajak's location, according to the Ancient One, was somewhere in South Dakota. Using proximity as his guide, he had set off immediately. The prairie below rippled like a golden ocean. Noah dove, the wind raising visible waves in the tall grass, and angled toward a solitary wooden house that stood alone on the plain. From a distance, it looked simple and well kept, its small decorations lending a homely warmth. He eased down into the open yard in front of it and took in his surroundings. A stable sat beside the house. Its door was ajar, and a brown horse stood quietly inside, watching him with mild curiosity. Noah paused. The house seemed empty. He hesitated, wondering whether Ajak was away and whether he would have to wait. Two redwood chairs under the eaves caught his eye. They were set neatly side by side, and something about them felt recent. The wood still carried the faint trace of warmth, as if someone had just been sitting there. He closed his eyes and reached out with magic. The Eternals were constructs of the Celestials, each one infused with powerful cosmic energy. Their abilities derived from the manipulation of that energy. As leader, Ajak held an enormous reserve of cosmic energy, but her power manifested as healing rather than raw combat strength. Noah focused on locating that distinctive signature. His senses mapped the residual energy around the house. He then activated a talent he had recently acquired, the precognitive sight from the Prophet of the Void, Malzahar. Through study and adaptation, Noah had tuned that gift to do more than glimpse fragments of the future. It could also trace and reconstruct recent pasts, turning currents of energy into images. The cosmic energy flowed into his perception and sketched two outlines. The residue here was made of two separate energy streams, which meant someone had been with Ajak. One possibility rose above the others: Icarus, the Eternal's most formidable warrior, whose power was often likened to a godlike Superman. Noah watched the reconstructed scene unfold in his mind, the two figures talking, then rising together into the sky. He recalled how, in the original sequence of events, Icarus killed Ajak on the day of emergence. The timeline had already been altered once, moved up years, so he couldn't be certain what would happen now. All the more reason to see this Icarus in action and to learn what kind of threat he represented. The energy after images shot upward and vanished into the clouds. Noah didn't hesitate. He angled his trajectory to follow them, intent on finding out where the leader of the Eternals and their greatest warrior had gone. Chapter 310, Mutant Creatures. Given the same treatment as Captain America, Noah unfolded himself and became a streak of light, chasing the two trails of cosmic energy across the sky. Only the brown horse in the stable remained, staring dumbfounded. The phantom of energy moved incredibly fast, which meant its master, the Eternal Icarus, was moving that fast as well. Without the boost from the Resolve rune and the Infinity Stones, Noah's natural magical flight couldn't keep up. He had to tap the Resolve rune just enough to match the Phantom's speed. Noah wasn't surprised that Icarus could fly so fast. There was another Eternal even quicker than him, the Eternal known as Flash, a woman who, Noah recalled, was deaf and mute. He wondered, not for the first time, why the Celestials would make some of their creations deaf and mute. Strange tastes, perhaps. Still, Icarus's out-in-space speed was on another level. Noah remembered that Flash could fly from Earth to the Sun in a short time and even plunge into the Sun to commit suicide. Whatever Icarus's exact flight time, his speed had already reached superluminal performance, anomalous, but Noah attributed it to the Celestials' cosmic energy manifesting strongly. He increased the Resolve rune's output and accelerated. Soon he arrived in a snowbound region, Alaska, not far in terms of planetary scale from South Dakota where he'd been, then entered a forest. The energy phantom slowed here, so their destination was near. A few seconds later, Noah stopped tracking the phantom and even canceled his past observation ability. He'd already located Ajak and another Eternal. As he'd suspected, it was Icarus. The two of them stood on a cliff, talking. Noah wavered his hand and the space before him rippled like a fractured mirror. He slipped into the mirror dimension, a perfect place for hiding and spying. From there, he was invisible to them while still able to see their projections in reality and hear their voices. Even if he were directly in front of them, they wouldn't notice. The mirror dimension didn't affect the real world. He arrived at the cliff edge, standing beside Icarus and Ajak, ready to eavesdrop. The cliff was only about 30 meters high. Below him lay a frozen lake. On the ice, a pack of mutated creatures gnawed on chunks of flesh. They looked like wolves but bristled with tentacles and had an extra pair of forelegs above their front limbs. Huge, bigger than the largest polar bear. If they stood upright, Noah guessed they'd top 3 meters. One of the flesh pieces still had human clothing on it. Not far off were several oil wells, an oil company's drilling site. The bodies below were clearly the workers from that rig. The creatures had ambushed and devoured them. These are deviants, Noah thought. Deviants were another race the Celestials had created. Unlike the Eternals, whose job was to protect life and preserve order, deviants tended to consume life and cause chaos on planets where the Celestials had planted seeds, delaying the development of new Celestials. That was why the Celestials made the Eternals, to hunt down and exterminate deviants. They must have been trapped in the ice for centuries, Icarus said behind Noah, though he was addressing Ajak, who stood beside him staring down at the scene. Ajak's expression was grim. They'd thought the deviants had been wiped out long ago. A few days ago, they broke through the ice and surfaced, Ajak said. Icarus continued, I tracked them here. They killed everyone at the oil company. These deviants shouldn't be this strong, Ajak said, frowning. She'd been fighting deviants for years and knew their types and habits thoroughly. Deviants evolved based on what they fed on, but such evolution usually required time and specific conditions. These wolf-like deviants had only recently been freed from the ice. They shouldn't have evolved so quickly or grown so large. I observed them for a while and have a rough idea why they broke free, Icarus said. There was an energy fluctuation a few days ago in New York. I think you sensed it too. Ajak nodded. She'd been watching the New York incident from her small house, adhering to the Eternal's principle of minimal interference with the human world. There was a powerful life force in that fluctuation, Icarus continued. These deviants must have absorbed that power. It fueled rapid evolution inside the ice, giving them the strength to break out. Noah's eye twitched. He looked down at the deviants and at the corpses. Was he the cause? He'd sent out a surge of energy in New York. Did that feed these monsters? He muttered to himself, half amused, half guilty. Once this is done, I'll make sure you find a nice spot in heaven. He wasn't a believer. He'd never been to heaven, but the thought made him smirk. Noah had no idea that the resurrection wind he had unleashed had roused the icebound deviants. That global gust had begun to change the Earth in subtle but far-reaching ways. Many transformations were already taking place beneath the surface. As the mutant Noah had noticed earlier, the resurrection wind could stir dormant potential in certain individuals across the planet. This universe did not become a mutant world. There was no ubiquitous X gene, but wherever the wind blew, it scattered the life magic of the resolve rune. Almost all living things could drink from that life force and gain from it. At first, the effects were small, barely noticeable. People's fitness slowly improved, illnesses became less frequent, lifespans lengthened. Over time, though, the influence deepened and the benefits accumulated. There were unintended consequences. The deviants Noah saw now should have remained trapped in ice for untold ages, until the Celestials' arrival warmed the planet and melted the glaciers, freeing them at the proper time. Noah's interference changed that schedule. The deviants absorbed the resurrection wind's life force, and their already exotic biology used it to evolve even under the ice. With bodies and strength amplified by that energy, they shattered the ice early and clawed back to the surface. Occurrences like this were not rare. When Noah sent the wind out, he did not, and did not intend to, target who absorbed it. He had wanted to share the boon equally. All life on Earth, he'd thought, deserved a chance. It had been an impulsive decision. Noah had not calculated the long-term fallout. Not bad. More sources for missions, he muttered, stroking his chin as he watched the massive wolf-like deviants prowling below. He remained hidden in the mirror dimension, unseen by those on the cliff above. The conversation between Ikaris and Ajak had shifted, drawing Noah's attention. From his unseen vantage, he listened as Ikaris faced Ajak across the precipice with the ragged roar of deviants far below. "You've changed your mind," Ikaris said, his voice hard and restrained. "I cannot allow you to betray Aurelion the Judge." Aurelion the Judge, the six-eyed celestial who had helped shape them, was the authority Ikaris served. He had visited Ajak many times, and over years of talk, he had noticed her unusual attachment to Earth. When Ajak confided in him that she loved the planet and feared for it, Ikaris grew suspicious. He worried she might turn against the Celestials. Ajak's change of heart had not been sprung from nowhere. After speaking with the Ancient One, she had seen the Time Stone preserved in the Eye of Agamotto and understood the scope of the Infinity Stones. She'd watched Noah fight in New York and felt hope. With Noah and the knowledge the Ancient One had shared, she believed there was a chance to resist their creators. Finally, she decided to tell the other Eternals the truth. They would ally with humankind to find a way to thwart the Celestials' birth and protect the blue planet they inhabited. Ikaris knew of that plan. Ajak had told him long ago. But what Ajak had not expected was how deeply the revelation would unsettle Ikaris. After hearing her, he had turned away from Circe, his partner in earthly rituals for centuries, and their shared life had unraveled. Ajak did not know whether her words had been the cause. She only knew she felt guilty. Now she stood on the cliff's rim while Ikaris closed the distance. From his vantage, he needed only to step forward to send her tumbling into the snarling deviants. Ajak's face was not defiant, only sorrowful. She had seen the resolve in his eyes. "Then do it," she said softly. "If you must, kill me with your own hands." Ikaris's expression flickered with conflict. "When the day of God's manifestation comes, Earth will change," he said, voice low and tangled. "They will come looking. If your corpse is found, if they learn the truth you carry, the existence of the deviants will draw their attention and keep them occupied until that day." He spoke as if laying out a cold calculus. In truth, he hated the idea of killing her. He believed, however warpedly, that only by removing her could others be prevented from betraying their duty. Ajak looked back at him. "I led you down a wrong path," she whispered. Ikaris's jaw tightened. He took one step forward, reaching out as if to shove. For a long beat, his hand trembled, but then his face hardened with grim resolution. "Ahem, have you two finished talking? Mind if I interrupt?" a strange voice said suddenly at their shoulder. Ikaris's instincts snapped into action. In an instant, he shot a beam of cosmic energy from his eyes toward the source of the voice, every muscle coiled for combat. Chapter 312, Fight Against the Strongest Warrior of the Eternals. Whoosh! Bang! Two golden beams of cosmic energy shot from Ikaris's eyes, but they found no target. The sound had come from somewhere else. The rays struck a thick tree trunk instead, blasting it clean in half. The falling tree rolled down the cliff and crashed through the lake's ice. The commotion drew the deviants' attention. They glanced up the cliff, saw Ikaris and Ajak, gave a roar, and began to climb, ready to make a meal of them. Icarus had no time to deal with the deviants. He was focused on a different presence, someone who had approached him without making a sound and who had not been noticed. Where he stared, the air rippled as if a mirror had shattered. Fragments fell away and a figure stepped through. When Icarus and Ajax saw him, both registered confusion. Neither recognized the newcomer. Icarus, however, didn't care about identities. He wanted to know why this intruder was here. Had he been eavesdropping on their conversation while hiding? The man was Noah. He had been listening from the mirror dimension. When Icarus had fired the beam, only the sound had reached him there. "Hello there, Mr. Superman with the laser eyes, and Miss Ajax," Noah said, glancing at the smoking tree stump. "When you fired just now, I was still in the mirror dimension. Only the sound came through." "Who are you?" Icarus frowned. The uninvited guest's arrival meant he would delay dealing with Ajax. Based on what Noah had done, Icarus suspected illusion work, perhaps similar to Sprite. With deviants climbing below, he couldn't waste time. He stepped forward, ready to strike. "Noah?" Ajax's confusion shifted to recognition when he spoke the Ancient One's name. She searched her memory of Earth. Had she met this man before? "You are." Before she could finish, Icarus moved. "Whoever you are, showing up here today is your bad luck," he said and attacked. He stomped, the ground trembled, and in a blur of speed he was suddenly in front of Noah. He clenched his right fist to deliver a crushing blow. As an eternal warrior, Icarus's raw strength was far beyond that of ordinary humans. Bang! To Icarus's surprise, the man who should have been crushed raised a palm and stopped the punch. The impact rang out as a dull thud that vibrated the air. Icarus's speed left a furrow in the snow behind him. The collision shock sent accumulated snow sliding from the branches and made the cliff face shiver. Some deviants lost their grip and tumbled back into the lake, not because their claws failed, but because the rock they were clinging to began to flake away. Noah felt the force behind Icarus's blow. The Eternal had held back a little, underestimating him, but even so, Noah could tell the power was on a Hulk-like scale. A flying Hulk would be terrifying. He had already used the Resolve rune to fortify his body with magic, though not at full power, only enough to enhance his physical strength. This was a test, not a full-scale activation. "Miss Ajax, find a safe place," Noah said evenly. "I want to test the mettle of your finest warrior." The calm in his voice irked Icarus. A human speaking to an Eternal with that kind of composure felt like an insult. Anger spiked inside him. "You want to witness the Eternal's power? You'll see it." He poured everything into a second attack. Where his first punch had been restrained, this one was fueled by fury. He felt like he was giving 120%, and he swung a left hook toward Noah's face. "No more left and right hooks?" Noah teased, blocking the full-strength blow with his palm again, then adding with a smirk, "I can do left and right hooks too." Noah's hands flexed. He had been holding back, and now he struck. He gathered power in his left fist and slammed it forward. The incoming threat made Icarus react. Using cosmic energy in his left hand, he shook off Noah's grip and flashed away at impossible speed, then reappeared behind Noah, feet already leaving the ground as he used flight to burst into position. Noah's punch met only air, but it left a strong vibration. Icarus circled and readied his next move, cosmic energy flaring in his eyes, but Noah had seen him move. Golden energy coalesced in Noah's right hand, and for an instant, the faint image of a fierce dragon rippled across it. "Intentional punch," Noah shouted. Chapter 313, Have you eaten? If not, take my punch. Intentional impact. A ghostly golden dragon lunged through the air, and in the maw of that roaring beast was Noah's fist. Icarus had planned to use speed. As Noah swung, he would slip behind him and land a killing blow. The human strength was impressive, strong enough to stand up to a full-power strike, so Icarus had relied on agility to win. Among the Eternals, only Makari could outrun him, and she was not as strong. In his mind, it should have been simple. A being so powerful appearing human was an anomaly, but still, his strike would end it. Then the golden aura crashed toward him, and Icarus realized he'd miscalculated. Noah had already read his movements. More than that, Noah had noticed something about Icarus's style. He attacked with giant, sweeping blows that relied on raw power rather than finesse. It was a pattern among Superman types. Superman, Homelander, Icarus himself. When your strength is overwhelming, you don't spend time on technique. But facing an opponent of equal or greater power, technique suddenly mattered. Noah was no martial arts master. His skill came from the underground fights of the Strife template. Yet it was enough. After missing a blow, Noah sensed Icarus's motion, gathered the willpower that had built up in his body from taking 2 of Icarus's hits, spun, and punched back. Icarus watched the golden fist come at him and tried to pull his strike back to form a guard. Before he could cross his arms, the dragon's head bit into his chest. Boom! The intentional impact smashed into him. Icarus poured cosmic energy into his chest in an instant to block the blow, but the energy scattered. He only felt a crushing force and then was sent flying. The dragon head of light gnawed at him, and the impact tore him backward like a kite with a snapped string. Trees splintered, branches and snow exploded outward. He slammed into a small stone outcrop so hard the rock cracked in a ring around him. He was embedded in the wall, panting and grimacing. He forced his arms to free himself with an undignified heave, then fell to the ground on his hands and spat 2 mouthfuls of golden blood. The drops stained the pristine snow like twin golden flowers, melting the drifts beneath them. Hoo! Icarus' face had gone pale. His brow drew tight with unbelief and anger. He had never imagined an ordinary human could put him in this state. His chest throbbed as if several bones had cracked. He wiped blood from the corner of his mouth, let his cosmic energy surge to steady him, and forced himself up. Through the devastation his body had carved into the landscape, he looked at Noah, who had already relaxed his stance a little, not far away. "Damn it, if only I had my armor," Icarus snarled. The Eternals' armor not only boosted defense, it amplified their cosmic energy and strength as well. But they couldn't carry it around. Once removed, it could be donned again only aboard their ship. Without it, the hits stung far more. Icarus had no healing power. Among the 10 Eternals on Earth, only Ajax could heal, and he refused to retreat. If he fled now, Ajax would certainly reveal the truth to their kin, as she had threatened, and that would trigger betrayal against the Celestials. He would not let that happen, and his pride would not allow an easy escape. The golden light flared again in his eyes. Close quarters brawling had failed. He had to change tactics. He focused his cosmic energy into beams and fired them from his eyes. Snow along the path of the rays whipped up into waves as the high heat beams carved forward. Noah raised a hand and formed a shimmering blue magic shield with his palm. The ray struck it with a sizzling impact, bursting into sparks that hung in the air, but Icarus kept pouring energy. His output seemed inexhaustible. Noah, however, showed no sign of being overwhelmed. He bore the attack and began to step forward. While still feeding the energy through his eyes, Icarus rose into the sky. He retracted the beam briefly, not to flee, but to set up his next move. A sonic boom cracked through the air as he accelerated. In an instant, his figure appeared above and behind Noah. Then the golden ray stabbed downward again. Chapter 314. Icarus blinked out of sight and reappeared beside Noah as if teleporting, then unleashed a barrage of golden cosmic energy rays. The assault should have been decisive, but Noah merely turned, raised a hand, and blocked the beams. Icarus didn't relent. He repeated the maneuver, streaking around Noah in the sky and attacking from shifting angles. His figure blurred with incredible speed, creating the illusion of teleportation. The succession of sonic booms left no doubt about how fast he was moving. He changed posture and angle constantly, weaving his golden rays into a dense web meant to trap Noah. To his shock, no matter how fast he flew, Noah matched his rhythm easily. The raised hand Noah used to block was only part of the defense. Whenever Icarus aimed for a blind spot, an invisible shield would instantaneously appear and absorb the strike. Darting around like a fly, Noah muttered, using his shield again to deflect a volley. Icarus grew more agitated and thickened his beams. Seeing this, Noah yawned and flicked his finger. A thin blue magic beam shot into empty air where no one seemed to be. It looked like a miss. Then Icarus materialized exactly at that point and took the blast straight in the abdomen. It was as if Noah had predicted his position. In truth, Noah's foresight came from Malzahar's prophetic power, an ability he'd been testing like a kind of observation hockey. The earlier shield test had been part of that trial run. Now the predictive strike landed cleanly. The beam didn't pierce, but seared Icarus's skin, leaving a blackened scar and golden blood oozing from the cracks. Pain seared through him. He instinctively clutched his midsection and halted mid-flight. He was preparing to counter when he looked up and nearly dropped the thought. Noah was rising from the ground and flying toward him. Icarus had never imagined a human could fly unaided, without technology. There was no time to dwell on it. Icarus fired more cosmic energy rays, but Noah moved with astonishing fluidity, twisting to evade each strike. The beams only scored dark grooves in the snow beneath them. They couldn't touch Noah. Before Icarus could react, Noah was suddenly in front of him. "Is that all? How can I lose?" Noah taunted, then slammed a left hook into Icarus's face. The blow caught the right cheek, and Icarus's backward momentum increased. Noah accelerated with magic and followed up with a right hook as he closed in. Icarus could only take it. After each punch, he was knocked further back, consciousness beginning to blur. He fought to stay in the air, trying to convert the impact's inertia into lift and flee upward. Noah wasn't about to let him. With 3 successive detonations like thunder, Noah released a surge of magical propulsion, sonic booms cleaving the air. Even Ajax, watching from a distance, frowned. Noah vaulted past Icarus in a blink, stopped dead as if hitting an invisible wall, and thrust his open palm forward. The sudden deceleration should have torn any ordinary body apart, but Noah's form held. The residual inertial force blew a storm through the clouds behind him. Icarus had no time to break and slammed chest first into Noah's hand. Noah gripped him by the face, the other hand closing around empty air that seemed to obey his will. Then he clapped his hands together, compressing air and magic into a single crushing impact. Icarus's senses dimmed under the pain. "Skull-crushing finale!" Noah growled, releasing Icarus's face only long enough to seize the collar. He dove toward the ground, hitching Icarus to him. Gravity and magical thrust combined to accelerate their fall into a terrifying plunge. Mid-descent, Noah twisted, spun, and then drove Icarus into the earth with bone-shattering force. "Smash him!" Chapter 315, Getting to Know the Eternals, Part 1. Boom, another deafening roar rolled off the cliff. It was impossible to tell how many times that sound had echoed through the mountains, but this time the tremor felt even fiercer, as if the whole forest were shaking. A powerful shockwave radiated outward from the source, and wherever it passed, the ground seemed to be shoved by an invisible giant hand. The packed snow lifted and surged like an avalanche, carrying branches and leaf litter with it. Trees shuddered, their leaves whispering the unrest of the place as more snow fell from the boughs and joined the rushing wave. Some of the taller trees swayed wildly, looking as if they might topple. Wildlife had long since smelled danger and bolted, keeping their distance. The deviants who had heard the commotion and tried to climb the cliff had already slipped away. They were not especially clever, but they were cleverer than ordinary animals and could sense how dangerous whatever caused that noise must be. At the epicenter of the quake, the ground was split into a shallow elliptical crater, a scene that might have been mistaken for a meteor strike. But the meteor was a man, unconscious, comatose, lying prone in the very center of the fissured earth. Noah descended to the rim of the impact crater. The soil beneath his boots was unnaturally hot, as if freshly scorched. Thin curls of black smoke rose from the ground. The smell of charred organic matter and burned microorganisms hung in the air, acrid and unpleasant. In the middle of the crater, Icarus lay half dead. After taking a full QWER combo, he was barely breathing. His chest rose and fell in shallow, slow gasps. He was grievously injured and in a coma, but he wasn't dead. Part of that was his superhuman resilience. Part of it, Noah knew, was Noah's own choice. He had not killed Icarus. Noah watched Ajax sprinting toward them from a short distance away. That was the main reason he had spared Icarus. No matter what else, Icarus was one of the Eternals. These beings had lived together for ages, some for millennia, some like Ajax for millions of years, and there was history and affection between them. Killing Icarus outright would make any later negotiations or explanations far more difficult. There was also a tactical reason. Even though Icarus currently seemed aligned with the Celestials, there was still a chance he could change his mind. Noah had reached that conclusion after thinking back to the Eternals film and what he knew about their origin and behavior. The Celestials had created both the Eternals and the Deviants. In the first iteration, the Deviants were intended to suppress certain predators on a planet, organisms the Celestials thought would interfere with life's development. But once the Deviants were unleashed, they did not behave as designed. After exterminating those predators, the Deviants evolved into even more formidable predators themselves, becoming an invasive force that threatened the planet's ecological balance. The Celestials could not control them. To prevent a repeat, the Celestials created the Eternals as a new safeguard, engineered so they could not evolve the way Deviants could. And to keep the Eternals from developing motives of their own, the Celestials repeatedly wiped their memories after each mission. The Eternals were reset to factory settings, then archived for study and redeployment to another planet. Only the leader of each Eternal group, Ajak for example, kept her memories to coordinate missions. The rest believed each assignment was their first. When Ajak had told Icarus the truth, he'd been devastated. Learning that all the memories and lives he had built on a planet would one day be erased, washed away after the Celestials' work was done, was a crushing revelation. Icarus had once followed Ajak's advice and told Circe, another Eternal, how he felt. They married and lived happily for a time. But when he learned that the life he cherished would ultimately be wiped out, he couldn't bear it. He resented Ajak for forcing that knowledge on him, and he protected Circe from the truth because he didn't want her to suffer the same torment. The pressure finally broke him. About 100 years ago, he left Circe. Ajak had told him because she saw leadership potential in him. She hoped he would become the next leader of the Eternals. She hadn't expected him to crack under the revelation and take actions she could never have predicted. Like today, Icarus had planned to kill Ajak and frame the Deviants. The real reason Icarus had intended to kill Ajak was not simple jealousy or ambition alone. It grew out of two things: Ajak's plan to betray the Celestials and make him a potential leader, and his love for Circe. The other Eternals had always believed their mission was to protect humanity and destroy the Deviants. Icarus had long known the darker truth. Their protection meant sending humans to die so a Celestial could be born, and when the mission ended, their memories would be wiped, including all the life he had shared with Circe. That knowledge had been a constant weight on him. Still, Icarus was a soldier. He had intended to carry out Aurelion the Judge's orders for the Celestials, even knowing what that meant. But when Ajak confided, days earlier, that she planned to tell the Eternals the truth and defy their creators, everything changed. Ajak wanted to betray Aurelion, but the Eternals alone could not face a Celestial, and if they tried and failed, Aurelion's wrath would fall on them and on Circe. Icarus could not bear that possibility, so he resolved to stop Ajak if she truly betrayed the Celestials. A thought had also taken root. When Ajak first told him the truth, she had hinted the leader of the Eternals might be spared the final memory wipe. If he could become leader, he might keep his memories of Circe. Initially, he merely considered it. Now, with Ajak planning betrayal, opportunity and motive collided. He decided he would kill Ajak and blame the Deviants, then take her place. He did not know, however, the true mechanism of leadership. In the original story, the leader was determined by a spherical device that communicated with the Celestials, a symbol that transferred ownership automatically to whoever approached it. Ajak had already decided who would possess it, and at the last moment, it moved to Circe. That was the instant when Icarus might have stopped Circe from petrifying the newborn Celestial, but he could not bring himself to harm her. Between loyalty to the Celestials and love for Circe, he chose Circe. It was for that reason Noah believed Icarus could still be reached. Noah planned to play the long game, let Circe speak to Icarus, and his devotion would turn him. He had a way of dealing with any celestial problems that might arise, threats like the Dragon King or Dark Star, so he did not feel compelled to kill Icarus. He broke him, but he did not intend to finish him. So when Icarus lay beaten and unconscious, Noah had no intention of murdering him. When Ajak arrived and knelt beside him, she looked down with sadness and pity. Placing her hands over his chest, golden sigils spun beneath her palms and a warm, repairing cosmic energy flowed into him. She did not fully heal him, She had not wanted him to wake up irrational or dangerous, but she closed the wounds that would have killed him. When she stopped, Icarus's color had returned, though the bruises darkened his face. Ajak took one last look at him, then turned to Noah. "Hello," she said. "No need for formalities," Noah replied, arms crossed. "Call me Noah." Ajak smiled with the quiet patience of someone who had lived for millennia. "You should know me already from the Ancient One," she said, then corrected herself with a small laugh. "No, the Ancient One only learned of me because of you." Noah nodded. "I know why you Eternals came to Earth, and who stands behind you. The Ancient One told me. I didn't expect Icarus to fall so easily. That surprised me." Ajak's surprise was genuine. The Ancient One had spoken of Noah as someone who might stand against a celestial, but that he was still growing in power. To see Icarus, their greatest warrior, so utterly defeated by a man not yet at full strength was startling. It made her reconsider Noah's potential. As Noah opened his mouth to answer, Icarus stirred on the ground. He did not lunge for Noah or Ajak. Instead, he pushed himself up and shot into the sky, mounting higher and higher until he was gone in a second. "Icarus," Ajak murmured, startled. She watched his fleeing silhouette with an expression that was equal parts regret, worry, and something harder to name. Noah had no intention of stopping Icarus from leaving. He'd noticed the Eternal feigning unconsciousness, but he didn't want to call him out, not yet. It wasn't Icarus's turn, and Noah preferred to wait until he'd found Circe so the two of them could talk things through. He had other things on his mind anyway. Circe had only met her new boyfriend after she went to London, and the end credits scene had revealed that boyfriend as the Black Knight. Noah didn't read comics, he only watched the films. Still, patterns were patterns, and the name made him think he needed to move quickly. What neither of the Eternals saw was the flash of yellow energy in Noah's palm as Icarus prepared to fly. A pulse of Mind Stone power passed into him, a deliberate safeguard. If Icarus remained stubbornly opposed to the truth, Noah reasoned, better to have a fail-safe. An Eternal with Superman-level power under his control could be useful. Then he watched Icarus launch himself into the sky. Icarus ascended so fast, Noah lost sight of him in seconds. He flew nearly straight up. Noah guessed he'd already broken through the atmosphere. Speed-wise, Icarus was a Superman analog, terrifyingly fast. In other regards, of course, he was not the Superman Noah had read about in childhood daydreams. Still, the comparison satisfied him enough to nod once to himself. "Why didn't you stop him?" Ajak's voice cut across Noah's thoughts. He turned away from the empty sky to find her there, watching him. "I think you could have." Noah met her eyes. Instead of answering, he said, "I'd like to know why you want to heal someone who just tried to kill you, Ajak." Ajak's expression flickered, complicated and old, then smoothed into calm. She stepped down from the shallow pit where she'd fallen and began to speak, not defensively but quietly, as if taking inventory of an old wound. "We are to blame, both of us." She glanced toward the frozen lake below, toward the broken ice and the human remains that drifted in the dark water. "This group of Eternals, we have existed for millions of years, guarding worlds and carrying out the Celestial's orders. Each time Arishem wipes our memories, he implants whatever false pasts serve the new mission. For that mission, we arrive on a planet believing it is our first. We deal with the deviants, and we try not to change a planet's natural course." She paused, recalling the ritual rhythm of their work. "When the day of emergence nears, I always let them scatter. I excuse it as the necessities of the mission. Go live among the people, be free for a while. I've done it countless times. Hundreds of years ago, human wars caused a division among us, and I used that fracture to let them go their separate ways. It's what I do to give them a life between erasures." Ajak's voice grew quieter, "But there's a difference this time. To prepare a new leader, I told Icarus the truth about what we are and what the mission would require. I think that is the heart of it. After I told him, he could no longer live in ignorance. He had to know, and once he knew, he changed." Noah listened. The woman beside him had followed Arishem long enough to call the judge's orders by name. She had lived through millennia. He waited until she finished, then moved closer to the cliff's edge. Ajak fell in step, slower now, and they walked together to look down at the shattered ice, revealing the black water below. I asked the Ancient One why you were told, Noah said. She told me you already knew I understood what the future holds. Ajak nodded without turning. When I left the team, I went into the world. I lived among humans. I watched them fight and lie and kill, but I watched them laugh and love. I watched them build and imagine. The planet changed me. She stopped and a small, sad smile touched her lips. I followed Arisham for millions of years. I never doubted him until now. The cost of giving birth to a god is too high. I realized that the sacrifice is not worth the promised end. So you told them, Noah said, finishing the sentence for her. You warned your people to try and stop the emergence. Ajak's hands clenched briefly. Yes. Her gaze dropped to the water where the bodies floated. I told Akaris the truth because I could not, in good conscience, let this continue, but I didn't reckon on his loyalty. He is loyal to Arisham in a way that frightened me. He rejected the idea and tried to bury the truth. Noah watched her face for a moment, then looked down at the small human forms half submerged in the freezing pool. The deviants were gone, only the damage remained. He thought of Circe, of the Black Knight, of the fragile lives these long-lived beings had affected. Why did Earth change you? Noah asked, not because he needed an answer, but because he was cataloging it in his head. Why resist now when you've obeyed for eons? Ajak's answer was slow. Maybe it was a buildup of small betrayals, mission after mission, life erased and replaced. Maybe Earth was simply different, complicated in ways that kept tugging at me. I don't know which. What I do know is that I couldn't bear the idea of the cost anymore. She turned back toward Noah, eyes full of a millennia's weariness. I told Icarus because I thought the truth could save us. Instead, he tried to silence it. For that, I am sorry. I failed to guide him onto a better path. A silence settled between them, heavy with regret and history. Noah watched as Ajak's gaze fell to the human figures in the water, and saw in her the sorrow of someone who had finally learned what it meant to be responsible for lives not her own. Chapter 318, Fight Hunger with Hunger. These poor fellows, we thought the deviants had been completely eradicated. We didn't expect there were still deviants lurking. We are the ones who harmed these people, Ajak said with some sadness. Noah narrowed his eyes. His presence here had helped bring the deviants back. Even without him, these creatures would have escaped as the glaciers melted with the Earth's warming just before the Celestials were born. So even absent outside interference, the workers from those oil drilling companies would still have been killed by the deviants a few years from now. These deviants are hiding now. Maybe we should find Fastos first. Ajak murmured that aloud, then realized Noah might not know who Fastos was. She explained, Fastos is the cleverest among our people. We rely on the devices he invented to track the deviants, but those devices were put away hundreds of years ago. These deviants will attack more humans next. We need to find their trail as soon as possible, Ajak added, as if she wanted to drag Noah straight to Fastos. No need to rush. I can find their tracks myself, Noah said, waving a hand. When he had been fighting Icarus in the sky, he'd seen the deviants fleeing below and remembered the direction they'd taken. He leapt up. His magic surged and carried him forward. Ajak watched him recede, then heard sonic booms from a distance. She felt a bit dazed. Noah's power reminded her of Icarus's. Noah flew low, less than 100 meters above the ground, his speed high, yet his senses broad. He spread his magic like a radar and scanned the forest below. Following the escape route in his memory, he soon found the fleeing deviants. They were wolf-like creatures with an extra pair of forelegs, gnawing on a corpse amid the trees. From the remains, it was clear their prey had been a brown bear, the kind that, in autumn, stuffs itself to survive winter. This one had fattened up only to be hunted down by monsters. Noah hovered and watched. The deviants were ferocious, both while eating and in motion. No wonder the Celestials, unable to control these things, had urgently created the Eternal to counterbalance them. If every creature on the planet were devoured, what would be left for the newborn Celestials? You like hunting, do you? Then let you taste what it's like to be hunted, as Noah said aloud, looking down at the deviants. He slowly spread his hands, and purple void energy gathered in his palms. As he brought his hands together, the void power flowed and reformed under his will. The deviants, who had been eating greedily and occasionally biting each other for more food, sensed something wrong. Purple sparks appeared on the snow beside them, 5 of them, appearing out of nowhere and surrounding the group. The beasts froze and scanned their surroundings. The sparks flared and then opened into a teleportation rift, and from it dropped creatures even more grotesque and terrifying than the deviants. They roared. A blast of sound burst from those monstrous mouths. The sound alone startled the deviants, larger than polar bears, causing them to stumble. Anyone who'd played League of Legends would have recognized them in an instant and shouted, "Holy crap, Cho'Gath!" They looked exactly like a smaller version of the Void Terror Cho'Gath, insectile, glutted maws, and thick, armored bodies, about 5 meters tall. Of course, they weren't literal Cho'Gath from another universe. Noah was using a summoning technique reminiscent of Malzahar's Void Swarm to conjure void creatures. As Void Overlord, he discovered he could shape the Void's spawn, crafting not only small swarms but also larger, more powerful constructs. This time, he had modeled the summons into 5 large void beasts to teach the deviants what it felt like to be devoured. The 5 bugs surrounded the deviants. The wolf-like creatures instinctively backed into a tight circle, watching the sudden enemies. Calm lasted only a moment. They didn't intend to wait for death. They bolted for the gaps in the ring, instincts telling them flight was the best option, but speed would not save them. In perfect unison, the 5 void beasts raised their insectile forelegs and slammed them into the ground. Cracks crawled across the earth, and thick, razor-sharp spikes burst up, shooting toward the running deviants. The beasts were caught mid-stride. The spikes impaled them through the bellies and suspended them in the air. They thrashed wildly, but the spikes were impossibly hard. Claws and teeth did nothing. The 5 void beasts looked down at their trapped prey, opened their gaping mouths, and drooled. Then they lunged. The feast began. Chapter 319, A Feast for Bugs. Back to the cabin. In the forest, 5 terrifying, grotesque deviants gnawed on several equally massive corpses, tearing flesh with their horrifying mouths. These ferocious creatures had been the apex predators here. Nothing in the woods could stand against their power. Yet in an instant, they were crushed by a far stronger presence and reduced to food. Sharp spikes erupted from the ground, impaling the deviants and lifting them into the air so they could not move. Small, tank-like void creatures rolled forward on thick, spiky insect legs and closed in on the immobilized beasts. Each one had 2 pairs of grotesque tentacles. The barbed tips detached like projectiles and shot into the deviants. New spikes promptly regrew at the tentacle tips, and the barrage continued like a machine gun. When the volley stopped, the void creatures tore into the carcasses and devoured them in great gulps. Noah had designed the attack patterns and even the appearance of these constructs based on Cho'Gath, the void terror from League of Legends. Unfortunately, these were only energy constructs, shaped from void energy rather than true void beings. If his mastery of the void dimension improved, he might one day be able to create genuine void creatures. For now, they were his tools. Noah landed among them as they fed. "Spit them out. Leave 2 pieces for me," he ordered. "Roar," the constructs responded, but they were ravenous. The wolf-like deviants, immense, far larger than a polar bear, were swallowed in seconds. Moments after Noah spoke, the void creatures transformed into streams of void energy and flowed back into him. He felt the return, more void energy than he had released. The constructs had converted the consumed deviant bodies directly into usable energy. When they vanished, 2 pieces of bloody flesh fell where they had been. Before the chunks hit the ground, Noah used a small spell to pull them to his side. He didn't plan to eat them. He had no taste for such things. From his system backpack, he produced 2 specimen boxes, the experimental material containers he kept for transporting research samples. With a small gesture of magic, he sealed the meat inside the boxes. Deviants were creations of the Celestials, and their tissues could be invaluable for study. Boxes closed and stowed, Noah's body blurred into a flicker of blue light, and he disappeared from the clearing. At the edge of a cliff, Ajak waited. A flash of blue appeared beside her, and Noah rematerialized. Fortunately for both of them, Ajak had traveled enough that she wasn't startled by a sudden teleport. If she had been, the drop from the cliff could have been dangerous. "Did you get them all?" Ajak asked. Not a single one escaped, Noah replied, but his mind was elsewhere. In the story he remembered, besides the wolf-like deviants, there had been a larger, more dangerous creature. In the original plot, after Ajak's death, that creature had devoured the cosmic energy in her corpse and evolved. He hadn't seen any trace of that beast here, only the wolves. Had it failed to break the ice seal like the others? Had it never traveled with them and acted alone? He couldn't tell. He didn't have the means to scan for deviant traces, so he pushed the thought aside. If the creature showed itself later, the Eternal could handle it. Ajak noticed the blank look on his face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Nothing. Let's talk somewhere else. At your place," Noah said and opened a blue teleport portal to Ajak's small wooden house. Because of the enormous cosmic energy within her, he didn't forcefully teleport her. She simply stepped through after him. Inside the familiar cottage, warmth seemed to seep into Ajak's usually cold body. She led him in and poured him a cup of hot water. Noah sat on a wooden chair, holding the warm ceramic cup between both hands. "So, what's the plan regarding the Celestials?" he asked. "The Day of Judgment is coming soon," Ajak said. "My priority is to find our scattered comrades and tell them the truth. Their power will help us face what's coming." "Do you know where they are?" Noah asked. The Eternal were spread across the globe. Finding them would be difficult. Ajak nodded. As leader, she could sense the locations of Eternal members. "All right, but put everything else aside for now. First, sense the location of one of your more capable members." Chapter 320, Finding Other Eternals. "First things first, you should try to pinpoint the location of a stronger member of your family," Noah suggested. "That one earlier. His name was Icarus, right? He tried to kill you because of Arishem the Judge. He didn't succeed this time, but he won't give up easily." Noah had no intention of serving as Ajak's bodyguard forever. He just needed her to find a few powerful allies so he could hand her over to them. Ajak understood. Icarus was the sort who wouldn't let go. If he discovered Noah was no longer at her side, he would move on her again. "We can look for Cersei and Sprite first. They should be nearby. Still in this country," Ajak said after a moment. "No, they're not in America anymore. They slipped off to England," Noah replied. He had meant to find them today, but had come up empty. After asking Lysandra to check, he learned they'd already left for New York and then England. Ajak frowned. She hadn't known. She rarely interfered in the lives of other Eternals, except when Icarus deserted Cersei. Worried Cersei might be crushed, Ajak had asked Sprite, who had always been close to her, to stay with Cersei for support. "You've seen Cersei and Sprite?" Ajak asked. "I met them once, though I didn't know their names at the time. When you mentioned the two Eternals in America, I guessed you meant them," Noah said. Ajak closed her eyes. Deep within her, a small golden orb began to pulse, and the locations of the other Eternals unfolded in her mind. The orb was the mark of the leader. It let her communicate with Arishem the Judge and sense where her people were. In the film, Phastos later used that same orb as the basis for a device that channeled the Eternal's cosmic energy, giving Cersei the power to petrify the newly born god. "Cersei and Sprite aren't here," Ajak said with her eyes shut, still tracing the positions of the Eternals. She couldn't find Icarus. He was beyond her sensory range, far off-world. After a pause, she added, "Gilgamesh and Thena are together, and they're both formidable. We should start with them." Gilgamesh? Thena? Noah mentally replayed the Eternal's story and the names Ajak had given. He didn't remember all the names clearly, more their abilities. But now he recalled. Gilgamesh, the powerhouse who punched like a battering ram, and Thena, a Valkyrie who could shape cosmic energy into weapons and who fought with deadly skill. Gilgamesh's raw strength could rival or even surpass Icarus, though he couldn't fly or strike from a distance. In a straight-up duel, he wouldn't necessarily have the advantage. Thena, a close combat specialist, suffered from episodes that could make her dangerous. Noah remembered reports of her randomly stabbing people during a bout. "All right, where are they?" he asked. "Australia," Ajak answered. "Australia." Noah was already above it, flying over a sun-baked expanse with Ajak suspended beside him. She couldn't fly on her own. Noah supported her with magic so they could travel together. Below them spread a vast, desolate landscape, red sand baking under a merciless sun. Heat shimmered in the air, Scattered birds crossed the sky, only making the isolation more apparent. Even approaching winter, the continent burned with a dry, relentless heat that only beings with extraordinary constitutions could tolerate. In that direction, Ejek said, pointing northwest. Noah focused, pouring magic into his eyes to sharpen his vision. The landscape resolved, hardly any sign of habitation, then a lone earthen house with a water tower nearby, and a structure that looked like either a signal mast or a wind turbine. He steered toward it, and wrapped in his magic, disappeared across the desert in seconds. Ajak remained steady beside him, unaffected by the speed. They arrived at a secluded homestead. The place had clearly been chosen for privacy, perfect for keeping away curious humans and for protecting others should Thena's episodes flare. During the flight, Ajak had filled Noah in on both Gilgamesh and Thena, and on Thena's troubling condition. Noah landed, and together they prepared to meet the two Eternals living in exile on the other side of the world.